recorded.
Oh, no!
I'm sitting here with His Honor Rosh Pakid Hillel bin David. And the reason we're here today is because His Honor... No, excuse me.
Tell him it's all my fault. No problem.
I forgot last night to push a simple little button, click of the mouse, and tell it to record what we did last night.
Truth be told, he forgot again this morning. That's so bad.
and so His Honor helped, and now we remembered, so we're good to go. Rosh Pakid Hillel bin David. That's a very honorary title. Do you mind elaborating for just a minute on that?
Yeah, it's a very prestigious title. It means I'm a clerk. I'm the chief flunkies, no problem.
Okay.
But
I was thinking a little more illustrious. I was going to do this a little bit more honorary than...
The clerk is responsible for keeping track of the findings of the Beit Din. So when there's a responsa, I'm responsible for keeping track of the responses.
Sure.
When there's say for example, somebody that goes through conversion, I'm responsible for keeping a copy of the certificate.
Very good.
So that I'm literally the clerk for the Beit Din.
Mm-hmm.
And while I serve as a member of the Beit Din, I am, if you will, a junior member. The Chacham is the Rosh, and we generally work together, but the idea is I'm expected to keep track of stuff. So you'll find out that I have every parsha for the last 15 years.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And some of them, we're not sure we want anybody to ever know about, but those were all learning processes.
Sure.
And so as we explore the triennial cycle, the lights begin to come on because you're doing it.
Right. Exactly.
So I'm just a clerk.
To be a clerk, right? Great. Of course, we have our friend here, Clark Corden, with us, and we've had a wonderful time already this morning discussing minuscule little details of varied things. So we thought rather than try to recapture what we did last night, our discussion this morning has been aimed a lot toward the Triennial Torah reading. And I know that more and more and more people seem to, and I'm sure you see this on your website, where people are forever now beginning to watch more and more. I noticed the traffic on my website when I started doing a series called The Masorah of Mark. It was amazing. All of a sudden, everybody's like starting to watch the Masorah of Mark and see, how the infrastructure of Mark, or the Nazarene codicil, worked with the triennial cycle, and how this Masorah, the oral teachings of Yeshua, were presented out of this, which a lot of new information is beginning to surface. But the thing that I think is the fascination that they're beginning to come up with is this Triennial Torah. They want to know how it works, and even if they don't understand it as well as Your Honor and His Eminence, at least they're wanting to have some knowledge of how and why this triennial cycle, and why a 3.5-year cycle versus a 3-year, or a septennial, or a annual, and all of those things. So those are a lot of questions that are really starting to come up. Clark has always been very good with questions and saying, well, wait a minute, now you guys are doing this and this and this, and I want to know how that fits in with all these other pieces of the puzzle. And so it keeps us on our toes.
And humble, I agree. Humble.
And I noticed His Honor was saying, well, that's a good point. You have to think about that. And so I know that if you're saying that, I'm scratching my head saying, well, I'll sit and listen for a while. So let's, if you don't mind, let's just talk just a minute about, how it all got started. I know His Eminence has worked on this for over 30 years, and you've been working on it for, about 15 years or something of that nature? Yeah. So how could I add anything to what you guys have experienced? Because there's a lifetime of experience involved in what the two of you have developed. And me, as someone who has come along and have this little minuscule part in what's going on, I get literally amazed. I'm thoroughly convinced now that is the right system, with no question. But I'm thoroughly amazed when I go through doing my little section with the Nazarene codicil, how that these connections just magically appear. And how genius you guys are at making that all work out. It's literally amazing. You guys must, really have manipulated and done all these things to make it work out so perfectly. So if you don't mind, if you mind giving us a little history of what you think is relevant?
I think that each person who's encountered the triennial cycle has encountered it on slightly different terms.
Sure.
For myself, approximately 20 years ago, I was in synagogue. We were doing the standard annual cycle. And after a few months of going through it like this, I said, 5 chapters a week, I don't have time to hardly scratch the surface. Why can we just cut this down?
It's not a speed reading program. It's worse than trying to have a speed reading program. There's a comprehension level here. You've got all that data, not just to read, but you're trying to learn the Torah as well.
So when I mentioned that to several of my colleagues, they said, there is a triennial cycle. And I said, well, what's that? So, well, I have heard about it, but don't know much about it. And I said, okay, well, why don't we go research, spend a few hours researching. So I wandered down
a few hours researching. That sounds so noble.
I went down to the library and I sat down with the Jewish Encyclopedia and I said, wow, look at this triennial cycle. And it's all mapped out. 3 years? That seems really nice. So I copied the pages, went down to the synagogue and we said, let's do it. And they said, yeah, that's more manageable. Now we only have a chapter or so a week instead of 5 chapters.
Right.
Much, much easier. And we began. But as we got going, we said, what is the Haftorah? What is the Ashlamatot? Ashlamata that we're supposed to be reading with this? I see here that the guy that put this together, a guy by the name of Adolf Beekler, back in 1894, in Germany, did it.
A couple of years ago.
He was a pioneer, a true pioneer.
Yeah.
Back in those days, he was writing about the triennial cycle and telling us that this is his doctoral thesis. So he's presenting it as not something we're going to do, but something that's worth studying.
Right.
And 20 years later, 25 years later, Yaakov Mann and Yitzhak Son really kind of picked up this this mantle and greatly elaborated. But as to how the Hacham got into it, how others got into it, I suspect that most people are going to get into it first because it's shorter, and secondarily because it is what was used during temple times. Now, Christians are especially mindful of how can I show the rabbis are no damn good, and how can I show them that that's not what it used to be. It used to be this. How can I show my independence?
Exactly.
We live in the West. The Occidental mind is very individualistic. So they jump on this as a way to make themselves important. But the truth of the matter is, as much as it's in harmony with what was done before, it is something worth considering, not to show up the rabbis, not to show up the annual cycle, but rather to understand that Solomon, when he wrote Ecclesiastes, he said, what has been before will be again. There's nothing new under the sun. So rather, it is a process of restoration.
Sure.
And it is befitting that the Nazarenes lead the way in the restoration, because it's the whole point of the Messiah to come and restore all things.
Right.
So those who are closely adhering to the Messiah should be in the process of restoring all things.
Right.
In other words, I expect that when Messiah comes, he's going to come and see everything the way it was supposed to be, because his people, his body, is going to be pushing in the right direction. So he's going to come and say, hey, you got it right, that's why I'm here.
Yeah,
it's about time.
Exactly.
Come on. Rather than having some kind of miracle where he's going to snap his fingers and the whole world is going to change. I don't expect that.
Yeah, and that's a great anticipation in certain circles. They think, oh, it's just like, excuse the analogy, but there was a program some time ago where a woman just wiggled her nose and everything goes the way it went, right?
Yeah, don't count on that.
Yeah, that's not going to be the case. But I think that many think that, that it's like, they're going to wake up one morning or some instantaneous something's just going to be all whatever. And it isn't anything about getting your shirt sleeves rolled up and getting busy and doing some pieces yourself. So obviously this triennial cycle has not been some magic dust sprinkled over anybody. It's been a lot of hard work. And
well,
I'm sure
consider what the rabbi did. Rabbi was working on this 30 years before I got started. And he and I came together specifically because he saw what I'd written on the triennial cycle, and we decided that we were going to collaborate and work together and try to understand the pieces.
Right.
And so I would guess for the better part of, 6 to 10 years, we were doing a 3-year cycle and trying to understand how the Haftorah, the Shmita, fits with the Torah portion.
Right.
And while we're doing that, the rabbi is giving me side assignments, and he's trying to keep me focused. I tend to bounce off the wall, so he's trying to keep me a little bit focused.
You need corralling too.
See?
I said too.
So he asked me, he said, why don't you do a study? And he called it the bimodality of the months.
Okay.
And I said, well, what do you mean by the bimodality of the months?
Yeah, that's an interesting phrase.
He says, Greg, he says in the Talmud that it says that Nisan is like Tishrei. And he says that if you look, there's a 7-day festival in the spring and a 7-day festival in the fall. That tells you that there's some kind of balance going on between these two. So what I want you to do is look for the commonality, the pieces that fit spring and fall that go together. So for example, one of the pieces that I found is that the Ashlamata, the Haftorah that we read during the Shabbat in the week of Pesach,
right,
is the same Haftorah, same Torah portion that we read during the Shabbat of Sukkot.
So this is coincidental.
Clearly the rabbis planned this, clearly. and the only reason they'd be the same is to tell you something's going on here, that you should be connecting these two pieces.
Sure.
So I did this study. It took me a long time, put a lot of pieces together, and the rabbis gave me, a couple of months. Rabbi had given me some hints from time to time, dealt with my frustration, and kind of kept me in line. But in the end, I finished the study, and I said, this is really neat information. But I have no conclusion. You look through the paper, and you don't see, well, as Francis Schaeffer said, now that I know this, how shall I then live? What do I do with this?
Yeah, exactly.
None of that. At that point in the study, I don't have a clue. It's really information. My ears were nicely tickled, and I really learned a lot, but I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah.
Okay?
So I'm going to go walk this out.
I hang it on the wall, and I'll be done with it. Well, the rabbi and I were sitting together studying one day on the Triennial cycle, and at some point the lights came on. We had read everything that any scholar of note had ever written on the subject of the Triennial cycle.
Sure.
I myself had gone through bibliography after bibliography, ordered up books and magazines from all over the world. Okay? In multiple languages.
Yes. Even some that you were not quite so familiar